Hi, I'm Michael James. Hit subscribe and let's dive into today's story.
I used to think that toxic was just a buzzword people threw around when they had a bad breakup, like a trendy way to avoid accountability. But then I met him, and my entire perspective changed. Looking back now, it feels like the entire relationship was a long, slow burn toward destruction, with me standing too close to the fire the entire time, convincing myself that the heat was warmth. We met at a friend's birthday dinner. I wasn't even supposed to go that night. I was exhausted from work, the kind of bone-deep tiredness that makes small talk feel like climbing a mountain. But my best friend insisted. She said I'd been isolating too much, and she promised this dinner would be exactly what I needed. And in a way, she was right, because when he walked in, late, of course, something shifted in the air. He wasn't traditionally handsome, but he carried himself with that effortless charm, the kind that draws people in without them realizing why. He made the whole table laugh within 5 minutes, and when his eyes landed on me, it felt like I was suddenly the main character in a movie. He sat next to me, even though there were open seats elsewhere. He asked me about my job, my hobbies, my family, and he listened, really listened. Or at least it felt that way. I remember thinking, this is rare. He sees me. By the end of the night, he asked for my number. My friend teased me on the way home, saying, "Finally, someone managed to get through that wall of yours." I laughed, but inside, I was already hooked. The early days were magical. He texted me good morning and good night without fail. He sent me links to songs that reminded him of me. He showed up at my office with coffee just the way I liked it, as if he'd been studying me. He told me I was different, special, unlike anyone he'd ever met, and I believed him. Within a month, we were inseparable. He made me feel chosen, like I'd won some invisible lottery. He talked about our future as if it were inevitable. Weekend trips, moving in together, even the names of the kids we might have someday. It was intoxicating. But even then, little cracks were starting to show. The first time, it was about my phone. We were watching a movie at my apartment, and I got a text from my brother. He glanced at the screen and asked, too casually, "Who's that?" I told him, and he nodded, but his jaw tightened. A few minutes later, he made a joke about me being popular with the guys. I laughed it off, but something about the way he said it made my stomach twist. Then there was the night he canceled our dinner plans at the last minute. He said something had come up at work. Fine, life happens. But when I called him later, he didn't pick up. Hours passed. When he finally texted, it was vague. "Sorry, long night." I told myself not to overthink it. He was allowed to be busy. I didn't want to be the crazy girlfriend. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Still, I pushed those doubts aside, because when things were good, they were so good. He could be unbelievably sweet, sending me flowers for no reason, writing little notes and leaving them in my bag, holding my face in his hands like I was the most precious thing in the world. It felt like love, or at least the version of love I thought I deserved at the time. My friends, though, were less convinced. They pointed out that he was always late, that he seemed to monopolize my time, that he subtly put me down in ways I brushed off his jokes. "Are you sure this guy's good for you?" my best friend asked once. I rolled my eyes and told her she didn't get it, that he was different, that she only saw the surface, not the depth of what we had. But deep down, a part of me already knew. I just wasn't ready to admit it yet. The first real fight happened 3 months in. I had made plans to meet an old college friend for coffee, someone I hadn't seen in years, a guy, but nothing more than that. When I mentioned it to him, I saw the flicker in his eyes. "Why do you need to see him?" he asked. I blinked, confused. "Because he's a friend. We were close back in school. He's in town for a few days, and it's just coffee." He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Right, just coffee. With some guy who's suddenly back in the picture." I tried to explain, to reassure him, but he shut down. For the rest of the evening, he was distant, his smiles forced. The next morning, he showed up at my place with breakfast and flowers, apologizing profusely. He said he was just scared of losing me, and that it made him overreact. Instead of seeing the red flag, I saw vulnerability. I told myself it meant he cared deeply. That kind of jealousy was almost flattering. That became the pattern. He'd get upset over something small, me liking a photo on Instagram, me spending time with my friends without him, me being distracted when he wanted my full attention. And then he'd swing back with overwhelming affection, flowers, gifts, apologies. It was whiplash, and I didn't realize then how it was conditioning me to stay. Over time, my world got smaller, not because he demanded it outright, but because it was easier that way. Every time I went out without him, there was tension. Every time I didn't answer a text fast enough, there were accusations. So I stopped making plans with friends. I answered immediately, no matter what I was doing. I adjusted my schedule to his, convincing myself it was love. And then came the first lie. One Saturday night, he told me he was staying in to catch up on work. I offered to come over and keep him company, but he insisted I didn't, said he'd be too distracted. I let it go. But later that night, scrolling absent-mindedly, I saw a photo on social media. He was tagged at a bar, drink in hand, grinning with people I didn't know. When I confronted him, my voice shaking, he didn't even flinch. "Oh, that? Babe, I didn't want to upset you. I knew you'd get jealous if I went out without you." I stood there, stunned. Me? Jealous? Somehow, he flipped it so that I was the one being unreasonable. By the end of the argument, I was the one apologizing for not trusting him, for overreacting. He kissed my forehead and told me he only lied to protect me, and I swallowed it. The cycle deepened after that. He began criticizing me in subtle ways. He'd make comments about my clothes. "That skirt's a little short, don't you think?" Or my makeup. "Do you really need to wear that much?" He framed it as concern, as if he was the only one who truly cared about me. I started changing how I dressed, how I presented myself, just to avoid conflict. But every time I thought about leaving, he'd reel me back in. He'd whisper things like, "You're the only one who really gets me," or "I don't know what I'd do without you." And I believed him. Because I wanted to believe him. Because by then, he had isolated me enough that I felt like he really was all I had. Still, my gut never shut up. It gnawed at me late at night when he didn't answer the phone. It whispered when he brushed off my questions with vague answers. It screamed when he suddenly became protective of his phone, turning it face down, taking it into the bathroom, changing his passcode without telling me. And then came the night that would break everything wide open. We were supposed to meet for dinner, but he texted last minute that he couldn't make it. Something urgent at work again. Frustrated, I decided to surprise him, to bring him food and maybe cheer him up. I drove to his office building, balancing takeout bags in my arms, only to find it dark. The parking lot was empty. His car was gone. That was the first night I realized the truth. He wasn't where he said he would be. Driving home that night, the takeout cooling in the passenger seat, my mind wouldn't stop spinning. The empty office building, the missing car, it didn't add up. But I wasn't ready to confront him yet. I wanted to catch him in something undeniable, something he couldn't twist back on me. The next morning, he called as if nothing had happened. His voice was light, joking, like he hadn't stood me up. "Sorry about last night, babe. Work was insane. I crashed at my place afterward. Didn't even have the energy to text." I remember staring at my phone in disbelief, the lies sitting heavy between us. I wanted to scream. "I was there. I know you weren't at work." But instead, I swallowed it. My heart was pounding, but my voice came out flat. "Yeah, okay. Hope you got some rest." That moment haunts me, the way I betrayed myself by choosing silence. From then on, I paid closer attention. I noticed patterns I had ignored before. The mysterious late nights, the sudden weekend family emergencies that he never explained, the way he guarded his phone like it contained state secrets. I told myself I was just being paranoid, that love required trust, but the evidence piled higher and my gut was louder than ever. One evening, I got my first real confirmation. He left his phone on the counter while he showered. Normally, I wouldn't have touched it, but something in me snapped. My hands shook as I picked it up. The screen lit up with a new message, a name I didn't recognize. The preview alone was enough to make my stomach drop. "Last night was amazing. I can't stop thinking about you." My ears rang. My hands went cold. I wanted to open the thread to read every word, but the shower turned off. Panic set in, and I put the phone down like it burned. When he came out, towel around his waist, he kissed me like nothing was wrong. I kissed him back, pretending, but inside, I shattered. For days, I carried that secret alone. I couldn't tell my friends. They'd say, "I told you so." I couldn't confront him. I wasn't ready for the gaslighting, the denial, the storm I knew would come, so I lived in limbo, waiting for the right moment. That moment came faster than I expected. The following weekend, he said he was going to visit his mother. Something about the way he said it, it felt rehearsed, too precise. I decided to test him. I casually asked which highway he'd take. He froze just for a second too long before rattling off an answer. My gut clenched. I waited an hour after he left, then got in my car and drove. Not toward his mother's house, but toward the city. Toward the part of town he'd once jokingly mentioned liking for date nights, though we'd never been there together. And that's when I saw it, his car. Parked outside a trendy little restaurant, lights glowing warm through the windows. My pulse roared in my ears as I pulled over across the street. Through the glass, I saw him, laughing, leaning in close, his hand brushing the arm of a woman I'd never seen before. She was stunning, confident, the kind of woman who looked like she belonged in that glamorous setting, and he looked at her the way he used to look at me, like she was the only person in the world. I sat in my car for nearly an hour,
watching them. My chest ached with every gesture, every smile. When they left, I followed at a distance, my hands gripping the steering wheel so hard they cramped. He walked her to her car, pulled her close, and kissed her like it wasn't their first time. That image seared into me. When I finally drove home, I felt like a ghost. I didn't sleep, I couldn't eat. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw them together. But I didn't confront him immediately. I needed more than one sighting, more than one message. I needed the kind of proof even he couldn't spin against me. So I started collecting. Screenshots when I could, little lies he told that I wrote down in a notebook, dates and times that didn't add up. Each piece felt like another stone in the wall I was building, the wall I would eventually trap him with. And as I gathered evidence, a new part of me awoke, angry, sharp, determined. For the first time in months, I felt powerful, because now I wasn't just the victim. I was preparing for war.
The notebook became my lifeline. Every lie, every inconsistency, every suspicious text preview documented in neat, angry handwriting. At first, it was about protecting myself from the gaslighting I knew was coming, but soon it became more than that. It became fuel. Each page was proof that I wasn't crazy, that my instincts had been screaming the truth all along. But while I was collecting, he was still playing the role of perfect boyfriend. He brought me coffee in the mornings, sent me playlists, texted me cheesy miss you messages when he was supposedly working late. The duality made me sick. I'd smile and nod, but inside I was tallying. Another lie, another act, another page in the book. One night, about 2 weeks after catching him at the restaurant, he showed up at my place with takeout and a bottle of wine. He looked at me with those same adoring eyes, as if he wasn't living two lives. "You're the best thing that's ever happened to me," he said, reaching for my hand. And all I could think was, how many times have you said that line to me, to her, to whoever came before us? The rage built quietly, like a kettle on low heat. I didn't scream. I didn't throw the wine in his face, though I wanted to. Instead, I played along. I nodded. I kissed him. I whispered back, "I love you." Because I wanted him comfortable. I wanted him unsuspecting. Meanwhile, my friend, remember the one who warned me in the beginning, finally cornered me. She asked why I'd been so distant, why my texts had become clipped. I broke. I showed her the notebook, the screenshots, everything. Her eyes went wide. "Oh my God, you have to get out." "I will," I promised, but not yet. She thought I was insane. Maybe I was, but I couldn't leave without confronting him, without making him see that I knew everything. I needed the satisfaction. So I planned it out. I waited until I had one final piece of undeniable evidence. And it came one Saturday when he claimed he was stuck in meetings all day. Hours later, I received a message request on Instagram. It was from a woman I didn't know. Her message was short, but devastating. "Hey, I don't know if you're his girlfriend, but I think we should talk." My hands shook as I opened the thread. She sent screenshots, dozens of them, flirty messages, plans for weekends away, late-night calls. It wasn't just casual. He had been building a whole parallel relationship with her, promising her things he'd also promised me. It wasn't even the betrayal that hurt the most anymore. It was the repetition, the recycled lines, the realization that nothing he'd ever said to me was unique or special. It was a script he used on whoever was willing to listen. That night, I decided it was time. I invited him over for dinner. I cooked his favorite meal, lit candles, poured wine. I smiled and laughed as though everything was perfectly normal. He relaxed, completely unaware that the ground beneath him was about to crumble. Halfway through the meal, I excused myself to the bedroom. When I came back, I had the notebook in my hands. I set it down on the table between us. His brows furrowed. "What's this?" he asked. "Read it," I said. My voice was calm, too calm. He flipped it open, scanned a few lines, and I watched the color drain from his face. Page after page, timestamps, quotes, screenshots printed and taped in. His jaw tightened, his hand trembled slightly as he turned the pages. When he finally looked up at me, his mask slipped. No charm, no fake vulnerability, just raw anger. "You've been spying on me?" he hissed. I laughed, an ugly, bitter sound. "Spying? No, documenting. Because every time I asked questions, you made me feel crazy. Gaslighting 101. But this," I tapped the book, "this proves I'm not insane. You are exactly who I thought you were." He tried to spin it, of course. tried to claim that the other woman was nothing serious, that I was the one he truly loved. His words sounded pathetic, like rehearsed lines from a bad play. And for the first time, I didn't flinch. I told him to leave. He refused. He raised his voice, accusing me of betraying him. That was his go-to, flipping blame so fast it left me dizzy. But this time, I stood my ground. My friend was already on standby. I sent her a single text, and 5 minutes later, she was at my door. He saw her and finally realized I wasn't bluffing, that the curtain had dropped. With one last glare, he grabbed his things and stormed out, slamming the door so hard the picture frames rattled. I sank to the floor, shaking, tears streaming down my face, not because I wanted him back, but because the weight of months of lies had finally crashed down all at once. I thought that was the end. But in reality, the fallout was only beginning.
I thought kicking him out that night would be the clean break. I thought he'd disappear, slink back into whatever double life he'd been living, and I'd finally be free. But toxic people don't exit quietly. They claw, they linger, they haunt. The very next day, my phone lit up with messages. At first, they were apologetic. I can explain everything. I messed up, but I love you more than anything. Then they turned desperate. Please don't do this to us. You're the only one who understands me. Finally, they grew darker. If you walk away, you'll regret it. You'll never find someone who loves you like I do. I blocked his number, but he found other ways. Burner accounts on social media, emails from addresses I didn't recognize. Once, a handwritten letter slid under my apartment door. I still don't know how he got inside the building. Every time I started to feel a sliver of peace, there he was again, pulling me back into the nightmare. My friends rallied around me. They told me to call the police, to file for a restraining order. But part of me still hesitated. Not because I wanted him back. I didn't. But because admitting I needed legal protection made it all terrifyingly real. It meant acknowledging how unsafe I had actually been. And then came the night that stripped away any remaining hesitation. I was walking home from the train, headphones in, lost in my thoughts. It was late, the street mostly empty. And then I felt it, that prickle at the back of my neck. I turned, and there he was, standing half a block behind me, hands shoved in his jacket pockets, staring. I froze. My heart raced. "What do you want?" I called, my voice trembling despite how hard I tried to sound firm. He took a step closer. "I just want to talk." I shook my head. "There's nothing left to say. Leave me alone." But he kept walking toward me, slow and deliberate, like a predator closing in. Panic surged through me. I pulled out my phone, pretending to dial 911, and finally, he stopped. His face twisted with something I'd never seen before. Rage, desperation, maybe both. He spat on the ground, turned, and stormed off into the night. I went straight to my friend's place that evening, shaking so hard I couldn't hold a glass of water steady. That was the final straw. The next morning, I filed a police report and started the process for a restraining order. It wasn't easy. There were forms, hearings, the humiliation of retelling everything to strangers in authority, but it was necessary. The order was eventually granted. He couldn't come within a certain distance of me, couldn't contact me in any way, and for a while it worked. The messages stopped, the shadows I thought I saw on street corners disappeared. I started to breathe again. But the damage was done. Even after he was gone, his voice lived in my head. When I looked in the mirror, I heard his criticisms. "That skirt's too short. You look better without makeup. You'll never find anyone else." It took months before I could silence those echoes, and even now sometimes they creep back in. Dating after him was impossible at first. Anytime someone showed interest, my walls shot up. If they texted too often, I panicked. If they didn't text enough, I spiraled. I kept waiting for the lies, the cheating, the mask to slip. I trusted no one, not even myself. Therapy helped. My friends helped. Slowly, painfully, I began to rebuild. I learned that love isn't supposed to feel like walking on eggshells, that jealousy isn't proof of passion, that flowers and apologies mean nothing if the same wounds keep being inflicted. But the biggest lesson, that ignoring my gut was the costliest mistake I ever made. It whispered the truth to me from the very beginning. I just didn't want to hear it. Even now, years later, I sometimes wake up from dreams where he's back, smiling, charming, holding out his hand like none of it ever happened. And for a split second, I believe him again. Then I remember the notebook, the restaurant, the other women, the stalking. And I remind myself, some people don't love you. They consume you. He almost consumed me completely, but I survived. In the weeks after the restraining order was granted, I felt like I was living in a fragile bubble. I could finally walk down the street without constantly checking over my shoulder, but the paranoia lingered like a second skin.
Every unknown number that flashed on my phone made my stomach drop. Every knock at the door sent me scrambling to the peephole. My friends told me I should feel victorious. I had stood up to him. I had survived. And on some level, I did feel stronger. But mostly, I felt hollow. Like someone had scooped out the parts of me that trusted, that believed, that loved easily, and left behind only suspicion and fear. At night, I replayed everything. The first dinner, the flowers, the way he'd look at me like I was the center of his universe. Then the cracks, the lies, the gaslighting, the cheating, and finally, the stalking. How did I let it go on for so long? How did I mistake control for love? That question kept me awake more than anything else. Therapy was where I started piecing it together. My therapist said something that stuck with me. You weren't weak, you were groomed. He conditioned you, little by little, until you couldn't see the cage he'd built around you. That hit me like a punch. I had blamed myself for months, thinking I'd been naive, gullible, stupid, but the truth was more insidious. He didn't show up on day one as a monster. He eased me in with charm, with attention, with promises. By the time the toxicity revealed itself, I was already too invested, too entangled. The healing wasn't linear. Some days I felt empowered, like I had reclaimed my voice, my autonomy. Other days I spiraled into memories, replaying arguments in my head, wondering if I'd imagined the cruelty. That's the part people don't talk about enough. Even after you escape, their words linger. They take root in your brain, blooming in ugly ways long after they're gone. I started journaling, not like the notebook I'd kept on him, but a notebook for myself. Every day I wrote one truth about me, something to counter the lies he fed me. I am not hard to love. I am not overreacting. I am worthy of respect. Slowly, page by page, I rewrote the script in my head. Dating again took time. The first man who held my hand in public, I flinched, expecting criticism. The first man who complimented my outfit, I didn't believe him. I kept waiting for the hidden agenda, the sharp edge behind the kindness. But gradually, I learned to tell the difference between genuine affection and manipulation. There were setbacks. One man raised his voice during an argument, and I froze, transported back to nights of being cornered, blamed, belittled. I ended things quickly, not because he was like my ex, but because I realized I no longer had the tolerance for even the shadow of that kind of treatment. And that was growth. Years later, I still carry scars, but they no longer control me. I can look back now and see the whole arc for what it was, a masterclass in how toxicity disguises itself as love. A cautionary tale I wouldn't wish on anyone. Sometimes people ask if I regret it, if I regret ever meeting him. My answer is complicated. Part of me wishes I could erase it all, save myself the pain, but another part knows the experience shaped me. It forced me to confront my patterns, my boundaries, my worth. It taught me to never ignore my gut again. And maybe most importantly, it taught me what love is not. Love is not surveillance. Love is not jealousy dressed as devotion. Love is not keeping score or keeping secrets. Love is freedom. He almost convinced me otherwise. He almost convinced me that love was supposed to hurt, that passion and pain were the same thing. But I live to tell the story. And by telling it, I hope maybe someone else will see the red flags sooner than I did. Because if there's one thing I know now, it's this. A toxic relationship doesn't just break your heart, it rewires your brain. And surviving it means learning how to untangle yourself thread by thread until you finally remember who you were before the poison seeped in. And when you do, when you finally breathe again, it's the sweetest kind of freedom.
It was almost a year after the restraining order. By then, I had started to find my rhythm again. New routines, new hobbies, even tentative new friendships. Life didn't feel normal yet, but it felt manageable, survivable. I could go days without thinking about him, and that in itself felt like a victory. Then one evening, I came home to find an envelope taped to my apartment door. No return address, no markings, just my name scrawled across the front in handwriting I knew too well. My hands went numb. I opened it carefully, half expecting something threatening, but it wasn't. It was a letter, pages and pages of it. He wrote about how much he'd changed, how therapy had made him realize his mistakes, how I was the love of his life, and we were meant to find our way back. He apologized for everything, but in the same breath minimized it. I was scared. I didn't know how to love properly. You pushed me away. The contradictions screamed at me. It wasn't accountability. It was another manipulation, dressed as remorse. For a moment, though, I'll admit it, it hooked me. My heart sped up reading his words, remembering the good moments, the version of him I had once loved so deeply. That's the insidious part of toxic love. It embeds itself like a splinter. Even when you pull it out, the wound throbs if you touch it. I didn't respond. Instead, I called my friend, the same one who had been my anchor from the beginning. She rushed over, read the letter, and ripped it in half without hesitation. She said, "He doesn't get to write the ending. You do." I clung to that. But the letter shook me, and suddenly I was back in hypervigilance mode. Every car that slowed near my street made my chest tighten. Every time my phone buzzed, I braced myself for another intrusion. Weeks passed without incident, but the fear lingered like a shadow. I finally told my therapist about the letter. She nodded knowingly, as if she'd been expecting it. They often try to reinsert themselves once they sense you've moved on. It's not about love, it's about control. That phrase rang in my head. Not love, control. It became my mantra. Every time I caught myself missing the highs, the butterflies, the intensity, I repeated it. That wasn't love. That was control. I started pouring my energy into things that were mine and mine alone. I took a solo trip to the mountains, hiked trails until my legs burned, and for the first time in years, I felt small in the best way, insignificant compared to the beauty of the world. I picked up painting again, filling canvases with messy swirls of color that mirrored the chaos in my head. I reconnected with old friends, ones I had abandoned during the relationship, and apologized for disappearing. Some welcomed me back with open arms, others didn't, and I couldn't blame them. That was another hard truth. Toxic relationships don't just hurt the people in them, they send shockwaves outward, damaging friendships, family ties, communities. I had to face that, take responsibility, and rebuild slowly. One night, months after the letter, I dreamt about him again. In the dream, he was standing in my living room, smiling, reaching for me like nothing had ever happened. But instead of freezing in fear like I used to, I told him to leave. In the dream, he did. I woke up crying, but this time, the tears weren't from weakness. They were from relief. That was when I realized the hold was finally breaking. I wouldn't say I was healed. Healing isn't a finish line you cross. It's a process, a choice you make over and over. But I was no longer his prisoner, even in my own head. And that felt like the greatest revenge of all. Because toxic people thrive when they occupy your every thought. And I was done giving him that power. I was finally choosing me.
When I finally dipped my toe back into dating, I didn't announce it to anyone. Not my friends, not my therapist. Just me, quietly downloading an app and scrolling through strangers' profiles like I was browsing another world. The first date I went on was harmless. A man named David who worked in IT, loved dogs, and laughed nervously every time the waiter asked a question. He wasn't my type, but he was kind. That mattered more than I expected. At dinner, when I excused myself to the restroom, I braced for the interrogation that would have come from my ex. Where were you? Who texted you? Why were you gone so long? But when I came back, David just smiled and asked if I wanted to split dessert. I almost cried at the simplicity of it. That's when I realized how warped my baseline had become. I had learned to see control as attention, criticism as care, jealousy as passion. Sitting across from someone who simply let me exist without suspicion felt revolutionary. It wasn't all smooth, though. On another date, a man reached across the table and touched my wrist suddenly, and I flinched so hard he looked startled. "I'm sorry," I blurted, embarrassed. I'm not great with surprises." He nodded gently. "That's okay. You don't owe me comfort." Those words stuck with me. You don't owe me comfort. No one had ever said that to me before. In my last relationship, my comfort was irrelevant. His was everything. Learning that my boundaries mattered just as much as someone else's was a foreign, beautiful lesson. Meanwhile, my family was quietly piecing together how much I had endured. For so long, I'd kept them at arm's length, ashamed to admit how bad it was. When I finally opened up, telling them about the lies, the other women, the stalking, my mother wept. My father, usually stoic, clenched his fists and muttered, "If I ever see him again." But what hurt most was my younger sister's reaction. She whispered, "I thought you didn't want us anymore." My heart shattered. That was the collateral damage. My withdrawal hadn't just protected him, it had wounded the people who loved me most. Rebuilding those bridges meant countless conversations, apologies, and time. And yet, as painful as it was, it also gave me perspective. Toxic love doesn't just poison you, it spreads like smoke, suffocating everyone nearby. I didn't see it then, but I saw it clearly now. The more distance I gained, the more patterns I recognized. His good morning texts felt like devotion, but they were actually surveillance, making sure I woke up thinking of him. His concern about my clothes wasn't protection, it was ownership. His apologies weren't remorse, they were reset buttons to keep me tethered. I began writing those realizations down. Page after page, I turned them into essays, reflections, raw stories. At first, it was just for me, a way to purge the poison. But eventually, I shared one online. The response was overwhelming. Strangers messaged me saying, "This is my story too." People thanked me for putting into words what they couldn't. That's when I understood surviving wasn't just about reclaiming my own life. It was about breaking the silence for others still trapped. If my words could be a crack of light in someone else's dark tunnel, maybe all that pain had a purpose. I won't lie and say, I never think of him anymore. Sometimes I'll hear a song he once sent me, or I'll pass a restaurant where we ate, and for a split second, the memories flood back. The good ones, the intoxicating ones. Then the rest rushes in. The lies, the fear, the night I saw him with someone else. And I remind myself that nostalgia is a liar. Because the truth is, he wasn't my soulmate. He was my lesson. And slowly, I'm learning to love again. Not recklessly, not blindly, but with open eyes and a stronger heart. I've stopped searching for fireworks, for that dizzying rush that once swept me off my feet. Now I look for steadiness, for peace, for someone who doesn't make me question my sanity. Because if there's one thing my toxic relationship taught me, it's that love should never feel like survival. It should feel like coming home.
Just when I thought I had closed the chapter completely, he found a new way to reappear. It was 2 years after the breakup. By then, the restraining order had expired. I didn't renew it. I thought I didn't need to. I was stronger, busier, happier. I had started seeing someone steady, a man named Mark, who treated me with a gentleness I hadn't known was possible. For the first time, I felt safe enough to imagine a future that didn't include fear. Then, one morning, scrolling through social media, his face popped up on my screen. He had created a new account, and the profile picture was of him with a woman, smiling, arms around each other. His caption read, "Finally found my forever." I froze. My heart shouldn't have reacted the way it did, but it did. Anger, jealousy, confusion, emotions I thought I'd buried surged all at once. How dare he get to play the role of the devoted partner now? How dare he reinvent himself like none of it ever happened? For a few minutes, I spiraled. I stalked their photos, dissected her smile, her comments, the way he wrote about her. My chest tightened with the old familiar thought, what if it really was me? What if I was the reason he was toxic? What if he's finally better for her? But then I stopped. I closed the app, set down my phone, and took a deep breath. I reminded myself of the notebook, the stalking, the nights I cried myself to sleep, the way he twisted every mistake back onto me. The truth was simple. He hadn't changed. He had just found someone new to play his game with. And if she hadn't seen the red flags yet, she would. Because men like him don't transform overnight. They camouflage. Still, it haunted me. For weeks, I dreamed of him again. Sometimes he was charming. Sometimes monstrous. Sometimes I woke up in tears. Sometimes shaking with rage. My therapist told me it was normal, that trauma doesn't vanish. It resurfaces when triggered. She reminded me that healing isn't linear, and relapse into old thoughts doesn't mean I've gone backward. One night, after another restless dream, I sat down with my journal. I wrote a letter, not to him, but to myself. Dear me, it was never your fault. You didn't deserve the lies, the cheating, the manipulation. You weren't too much. You weren't too little. You were simply someone who loved, and you gave that love to a man who didn't know how to receive it without destroying it. His story is not your story anymore. His choices are not your burden. You survived, and that survival is proof of your strength. You are free now. Don't waste another heartbeat wondering if he's changed. The only change that matters is the one you made, choosing yourself. I cried as I finished writing, but for the first time, the tears felt cleansing, not suffocating. The next morning, I told Mark everything. How seeing my ex again had triggered me, how scared I was of slipping back into old wounds. Instead of judging me, he listened. He held my hand and said, "Healing doesn't mean you never hurt again. It means you don't hurt alone." That sentence broke something open in me, because that's what real love looked like. Not silencing, not controlling, not twisting, just presence. In that moment, I knew I was finally on the other side. But I also knew I had one more step left. To tell the full story out loud, not just in journals and therapy sessions, but to the world. Not for revenge, not to expose him, but to reclaim my narrative completely. So I sat down one weekend and wrote everything, start to finish.
The charm, the lies, the cheating, the stalking, the aftermath. I poured out every detail, every scar, every lesson. And then I shared it online. Anonymous, but raw. The response stunned me. Thousands of people read it. Hundreds messaged me with their own stories. Some said they were still inside relationships like mine, and my words gave them courage. Others said they had escaped years ago, but still carried the scars. For the first time, my pain wasn't just mine. It was part of something bigger, a collective chorus of survivors who had walked through the same fire. And that's the real turning point. Because in telling my story, I stopped being his victim. I became my own witness.
Writing my story and sending it into the world felt like closing a door I'd been holding open for too long. For months, maybe years, I had lived with the sense that he still had a claim on me, that as long as I carried the memories in silence, part of me was still tethered to him. But once the words were out there, shared and witnessed by strangers, the tether snapped. Of course, healing didn't suddenly become easy. There were still moments, standing in line at the grocery store when a man behind me breathed too close, or hearing a familiar song in a cafe, when my chest would tighten and my hands would shake. Trauma lingers in the body long after the mind says it's over. But the difference now was that I knew how to handle it. I no longer shamed myself for the flashbacks or the fear. Instead, I treated them as reminders. Yes, something terrible happened, but I survived it. And surviving meant I had the chance to rebuild. With time, I rebuilt more than I thought possible. My friendships, once frayed, grew stronger. My family, once held at a distance, became my refuge. Mark, patient and steady, became proof that love could be safe, gentle, and nurturing. The life I had feared I'd lost forever began to take shape again, brighter and fuller than before. Still, sometimes I wonder about the version of me who existed before him. The girl who laughed easily, who trusted instinctively, who didn't second-guess every kindness. That version of me is gone. But maybe that's not a tragedy, because in her place is someone wiser, stronger, and less willing to settle for crumbs disguised as devotion. If I could go back and speak to that girl at the dinner table the night we met, the one who felt seen for the first time, I'd whisper in her ear, pay attention. When it feels too good to be true, it often is. Listen to your gut. It will never lie to you the way he will. But since time doesn't bend to regrets, all I can do is honor the lessons I earned in blood, sweat, and tears. Here's what I know now. Love should not make you shrink. It should not demand smaller clothes, smaller words, smaller dreams. Apologies without change are just manipulation in costume. Jealousy is not passion, it's poison. The person who truly loves you will never make you question your worth. I also know this. Leaving was not my weakest moment. It was my bravest. Because walking away from someone who once felt like your entire world feels like tearing your own skin off. But I did it. And if I did it, so can anyone reading this who feels trapped in their own version of hell. Sometimes late at night, I still wonder where he is, what he's doing, if he's spinning the same lies for someone new. A part of me aches for the woman in his photos, because I know her story will not end the way she thinks. But it's no longer my responsibility to save her. My only responsibility is to protect the peace I fought so hard to claim. And that peace is worth everything. So here's the truth I carry now. The truth I want anyone who stumbles onto my words to remember. A toxic relationship does not define you. It does not make you unlovable. It does not mean you are weak for staying too long or foolish for falling in the first place. It means you are human. And being human means you have the power to choose differently the next time. I chose differently. I chose me. And if you're standing on the edge of your escape, wondering if you'll ever find yourself again, hear it from someone who nearly lost everything. You will. You will find yourself in the quiet mornings, in the laughter of friends, in the arms of someone who doesn't make you earn their love by sacrificing your sanity. You will find yourself where the fear ends and freedom begins. And one day, like me, you'll wake up, take a deep breath, and realize you're not surviving anymore. You're living.
Another story ends, but there are always more. Subscribe and stay tuned.